Okay, welcome everybody. Tonight we are going to continue our series. I think this is our seventh installment of our Halacha and pregnancy out of, I believe, 10 that are planned to start with. Tonight we're going to be talking about induction of labor. And I'm hoping our next installment will be about nida in labor. Induction of labor is a very applicable topic to me. It's something that I need to deal with every day in my office and every day for my patients. It comes in many different forms, which we'll talk about. And there's a lot of different discussions that I have with different rabbanim about the levels and the reasons to be induced and the timing of when to be induced. So the first thing I want to do is I want to just go over the definition, what induction of labor is. I don't know if I necessarily agree exactly, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. The definition of induction of labor: it's an action that is taken to prompt the uterus to contract during pregnancy before labor begins on its own in order to effect a vaginal birth. Okay, so the woman is not in labor, and we're trying to get her into labor by taking some sort of action. There are medical and non-medical ways to induce. I'm going to be asking if there's a difference between them. I'll bring up specific different ways that people get induced. There are also medical and non-medical reasons which I would like to induce the patient, or where the patient would like to be induced. And we'll go over a number of different scenarios that include some of those medical and non-medical issues. What are the medical reasons? They fall basically into three categories. There are maternal conditions. Something is wrong with the mother, so she needs to be delivered. Something is wrong with the baby, fetal complications or conditions, so we advise her to be induced, and because of those reasons, and we will mention a few. And then there are quote unquote non-medical reasons to be induced. Psychosocial medical reasons, something that's happened in the past to this patient, to their family, to a situation like this, and included in that becomes patient desire. The patient is asking to be induced for one reason or the other. So we have multiple reasons why someone would want to or is advised to be induced, and also multiple ways in which we could go about inducing somebody. And I want to find out tonight if there is a difference, between them in the view of halacha. And I'm going to ask Rabbi Siegelman now to take a few minutes and go over what is the halachic perspective on being induced. What are some of the reasons that we hold off on induction based on what Rabbanim and what we learned from Torah.
Thank you very much. Let's talk the mainstream approach. Of course, there are outliers on both ends, but the mainstream approach is a very basic one, and we'll identify that, and then we'll branch off. The most basic and mainstream approach is that a couple should not induce unless it's necessary. And the truth is that, Dr. Herman, you probably would agree to that from a medical perspective as well. Then the question becomes, how do we define necessary? Now, there's a fascinating tshuva that Rav Moshe Feinstein writes in Igros Moshe, where Rav Moshe writes that a patient in labor is a chola sheyesh bo sakana. We've discussed this in the past. That means that her life is in danger. What the relevant ramification for that being identified as a chola sheyesh bo sakana would mean that she's able to violate Shabbos. As we know, if a woman goes into labor on Shabbos, we may try to opt for the cab and the non-Jewish driver, but we know, as we've discussed in previous sessions, that if a non-Jewish person is not available and you got to get to the hospital, so the husband drives, even the Jewish husband will drive on Shabbos, and that is totally not only permissible, but expected and required in order that she has a safe labor. What is the reason? The reason is because she's a chola sheyesh basakana. Her life is in danger. We also know that we as Jewish people are not allowed to put our lives in danger. We're not allowed to be engaged and involved in risky behavior. And there is a threshold that different posts can discuss certain activities, certain behaviors, whether that's dangerous, whether it's not dangerous. And therefore we have to always be mindful of protecting ourselves and never putting ourselves in danger. The Meshech Chochmah writes that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu after the sneh that he can go down to Mitzrayim, so the Meshech Chochmah says Hashem tells Moshe that he can go down to Mitzrayim, Ki mesu kol hanoshim hamavakshim es nafshecha, something along those lines. That everyone who wanted to kill you had died. Moshe flew; he had to flee from Mitzrayim because people wanted to kill him. So Hashem said, "You can go back. Why? Ki mesu kol hanoshim hamavakshim es nafshecha. Everyone who wanted to kill you is dead." So the Meshech Chochmah writes, from here is the source that a person is not allowed to put themselves in a makom sakana, in a dangerous situation. Moshe was not allowed to go down to Mitzrayim. He needed a special heter from Hashem. Now you can go back. But we know, generally speaking, that we avoid dangerous behavior. Says Rav Moshe, if a woman is a chola sheyesh basakana when she's in labor, so if HaKadosh Baruch Hu initiates that, if that's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's decision that this woman should go into labor, we can't argue. That's HaKadosh Baruch Hu running the world. But for us to induce, for us to manipulate the labor, an early labor, and put her in a makom sakana, so Rav Moshe writes that would be inappropriate and usher unless there was some type of medical need. That's one approach from Rav Moshe. There's a different, that's more of a halachic, strictly halachic approach. There's more of a hashkafic approach as well, which is that a baby is always born on a specific day with a specific mazel. There's a Gemara in Shabbos that says that every day has its own mazel, every day comes with its own special spiritual significance. And again, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides that this child is going to be born on Monday, on Wednesday, on Friday, on Shabbos, whatever it may be, it's because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a spiritual plan and a spiritual destiny for this child, and that is very much connected to the day the child is born. For us to ignore Hashem's spiritual plan, and for us to say and to determine that this baby, although maybe he was destined to have been born on Thursday, but we want him to be born on Monday, right? So who are we to interfere with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's divine plan and the spiritual mazel that would affect this child? So that's more of a hashkafic approach, although I've heard the name of Rabbi Soloveitchik Zatzal, that he would say that hashkafa is also halacha. Halacha is what you're mechuyev, what you're obligated to do, and hashkafa is the way you're obligated to think. But they're both halacha. So both of those are the two main objections to being induced. Again, the fact that a woman's putting herself into a makom sakana, and the fact that we are interfering with the destiny and the divine decision of when this baby was supposed to be born. I will tell you, just before I pass back the mic, I saw a video circulating about a year ago from Reb Chaim Kanievsky. And the video showed a young man who had asked Reb Chaim Kanievsky for an eitzah, for advice, whether he should induce. And the word in Hebrew to induce is ziruz, lezarez. So they asked Reb Chaim, should lasot et haziruz? So Reb Chaim said, lama lo? Why not? So then the Gabbai said, give him a bracha. So he said, bua, bracha v'atzlacha. Then the man left. So then it was an interesting psak because many poskim are against induction. So they asked Reb Chaim, why were you matir? Why did you permit that? So he said, lasot et haziruz. He questioned. He says, zrizin makdimim lemitzvus. So the guy didn't understand what he meant. He says, so Reb Chaim said, bishvil ma'upo. Why is he here? to do mitzvahs. A baby is born into this world to do mitzvahs. A boy, a girl, we have mitzvahs. So ziruz, he was saying zirizin makdimim lemitzvahs, just like us, that we all, our attitude should be that of zrizos. We should do mitzvahs in a manner which is quick and we don't hold off of mitzvahs. So Reb Chaim said zirizin makdimim. Why not bring the baby into the world? That would also be a kiyum of zirizin makdimim lemitzvahs. It sounds like a joke, but that was the answer that he gave to why he told this couple to go ahead with the induction.
Very interesting. So I have somebody in labor right now, and her water is broken. And if I just leave her alone, she'll deliver in the next day, half a day. But her water's been broken now for quite a while, and she hasn't gone into labor yet. I'm going to give her Pitocin to give her contractions and give it a little push into the labor. So how do I now reconcile that with changing the mazel and me bringing the baby quicker and so on?
It's a good question. Generally, from the halachic literature, it seems that the whole discussion of to induce or not to induce is all relevant before labor begins. Once a woman is in labor, I haven't seen any posek who would say that you're not allowed to intervene further with the induction. Once labor is put into place, it's fair game. That's what I saw from all the halachic literature.
But she's right now not in labor. She hasn't made any cervical change. She hasn't dilated, which is the definition of labor.
So why is she here? Why is she in the hospital?
The water broke.
Oh, the water broke. I would say that the water breaking is the beginning of, halachically, that's certainly the beginning of labor. And I think medically also, I mean, that baby has to come out.
Okay, but the truth is, if I could speed it up, I could slow it down, I could be aggressive, I could be less aggressive, and so on.
I haven't seen anyone who's opposed to slowing down a labor as a, or not doing anything because they don't want to be involved in induction. Once the water breaks, that's there are shittas, we're not going to talk about it now, but there are many shittas that hold that once the water breaks, she's a nida because of that's labor.
That's going to be next month.
That's what I'm saying, but just to bring out that idea that we many would assume that that labor has not only begun, but that is labor. She's labor.
Okay, so with those halachic thoughts in mind, I want to talk about how someone actually is induced. Okay, and you'll see my point when I get there. Medically, in general, there's a few things that I have in my pocket that I could help induce my patients and move along and have them enter labor and have them give birth. There are medications like Cytotec given orally or vaginally. There's Pitocin, which we give through the IV, which will give the patients contractions. Additionally, and I use this often in my patients who have previous cesarean sections, where I want to avoid a little bit the Pitocin and definitely the Cytotec, I'm putting in a balloon in their cervix to put pressure on their cervix, which will release natural chemicals and cause them to go into labor. So that's a non-medication way of doing it. And finally, there are some people that I just break their water. They walk in the office, they're 4 or 5 centimeters dilated. I said, listen, go over to the hospital. I'm going to break your water. And, the contractions will start and you'll deliver. Is there a difference between any of these? Do you see a halachic difference in them?
I don't think so, but you didn't speak about stripping.
So that's going to be my next group that we're going to speak about. Those I told you are the hospital things. So when we talked about the definition of induction of labor, my view is that induction of labor is initiating contractions that result in labor and a vaginal birth, or if they have to have a C-section, but that culminates in a delivery.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm going to ask, is there a distinction between that? Because that's what I call inducing labor. What I don't call inducing labor is trying to get contractions going that doesn't necessarily result in a delivery.
Right.
For example, the patient says, I don't want to be induced, but I'm going to go spin. I'm going to do a spinning class for an hour because I know if I do that, I will get contractions. And maybe from that, that will result in a delivery. I'll eat spicy foods, sexual intercourse, acupuncture, acupressure, nipple stimulation. And these are two that we'll put in separate categories because this really needs, I'll tell you a story about this. Drinking castor oil, which is vile, should never be done because that's literally taking a medication to induce labor, except it's without monitoring. So you're putting yourself in sakana without monitoring yourself for the baby. And then finally, what you mentioned, my action is stripping membranes. So what should be the view of a patient who specifically says, I would like to give birth. I'm not in labor and I'm going to have the spiciest food because I know that that's going to give me contractions and I'm going to deliver.
Yeah. So again, in the halachic literature, I don't think you see, well, let me put it like this. In the halachic literature, I haven't seen anyone who has prohibited a couple from engaging in behaviors or activities that could induce labor in a very natural way. On the contrary, the Gemara does talk about sexual intercourse with a couple at the end of her pregnancy. And the Gemara says that that's good for the blood, and that'll speed up the labor. That's not a problem. Doing something natural, eating foods or doing certain behaviors, assuming it's not dangerous, is no problem according to halacha. Your question within the various options, medical options that are available, is one better or more preferable than the next? I think that we would approach the question from a little bit of a different angle. Once we've identified the heter, that halacha would recognize that this is a good time, this is a good patient, this is a good case where we can induce. So once you check that box, the question would go back to the doctor and say, Doc, what's the best method medically for this patient? If you think the balloon option is the best, then go for it. If you think Pitocin, go for it. But I think that would be the proper perspective halachically.
Well, I think that really what we're talking about is where we don't have that. We don't have the halachically agreeable reason to be induced. We're going to go through a few of them, but a patient just says, I'm tired of being pregnant. Help me, doctor. I'm tired of being pregnant. And
so the case is that the couple comes to you and says, Dr. Herman, we asked the Shaila and our Rav said no. Our Rav said we're not allowed to be induced. This right now, we have to come back in a week. If we're still pregnant in a week or 2 weeks, then we can discuss it. But he said, not right now.
But I'm very tired of being pregnant. What could I do to help myself?
What the halacha would say is all of the natural approaches, like you mentioned.
Okay, so let's get
once
to
there's
the
medical intervention. I think that's where it would become problematic.
Okay, so let's talk about for a minute stripping the membranes. It probably makes our nida. So
I'm not sure about it. We have to discuss it.
Okay, so we'll discuss that next time. It doesn't guarantee she's going to go into labor. So it doesn't fulfill my definition of inducing labor because doesn't necessarily culminate in a delivery. It might not, just like eating spicy food might or might not, just like acupuncture might or might not. So what is our objection to stripping the membranes?
I've seen Rabbanim, when women approach the Rav and ask for a heter to be induced, and the Rav says no, and the women are anxious, they really want it. I've seen Rabbanim be slightly more makel to strip the membranes, precisely for what you said. It's not certain, it's not a guarantee. We'll discuss nida next week because this is actually a topic which is being researched currently. The classic approach to stripping was always that it makes her a nida, but there's more and more literature coming out now claiming that she's not a nida. So we can discuss that. But I think that precisely because of the fact that it's not a guarantee, it's not an absolute induction. So there is a little bit more of a heter where I've seen Rabbanim will be makel should the patient really demand that they want to go into labor now. What do you think from a medical standpoint? Is that something that you're comfortable recommending in an early stage or like pre-labor?
Yes, medically, I have no issue with it, and have done it in the past.
Regularly? It's a regular protocol?
Not regular, right? It's the exact case that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Is that there's no, after my assessment, there is no real medical reason to be induced. But the patient is expressing that they would really like to have a baby, today, for whatever reason. They have a bar mitzvah coming up in a week and a half of their sister's making a bar mitzvah and they want to give birth now. And I said, listen, I'm not going to induce you for that, but you could try different things. And they go, could you strip my membranes? And I say, listen, let me just see if you're almost ready. And I check and she's already 2 centimeters. And I said, yeah, I think if I do this, it has a good chance of working, but there's no guarantee.
Right. So I definitely have seen Rabbanim and seen literature that is okay with that should the patient feel it's necessary.
Well, certainly I'm not doing it if the patient doesn't feel it's necessary. They'll never talk to me again after that if I do something like that. Okay, so just to move on, I thought about and looked at and listened to my patients in the last couple of weeks. So I put down a number of cases. Okay. Obviously, if we find no fluid around the baby, we have a fetal indication. It is not safe to let them continue being pregnant. We don't know what's going to happen in the next few days. It could be that nothing will happen to this baby, but on the other hand, why is the fluid low and what's going on with this baby? And we have criteria which says now it's time to get out. So I think everybody would agree, come to the hospital, have a safe baby, and wish a mazel tov. The next case I want to talk about is the patient with 2 previous cesarean sections. And now this is slightly off the topic of induction, but in essence, it comes down to the same thing. She's going to have a repeat cesarean section. She's, for whatever reason, when she's not allowed to deliver from below, and now it comes to timing of that cesarean section. And in general, if there's no special reason, we do them after 39 weeks of completed weeks of pregnancy. But I could do it at 39 weeks. I could do it at 39 weeks in 3 days. I could do it at 40 weeks. I could do it at 40 weeks in a couple of days. In general, just to tell you how it works, I set aside basically Tuesdays that I don't go to my office, that I'm just in the hospital, and patients that need to be induced, I try to do them on Tuesdays. Patients that are requiring cesarean sections, I try to do them on Tuesdays also. The patient's home for Shabbos, so we try to set them up. That's the day that I put aside. One of my partners puts aside Wednesday for that. Another partner puts away Tuesday for that. So in general, I'm picking Tuesday, right? They're now 39 weeks in 1 day. Do I need to say, hey, I shouldn't be doing that and I should wait for 39 weeks in 3 days or 39 weeks in 5 days? I'm in essence choosing the date that this baby is coming.
Right. Let's go back to the 2 main reasons. There are a few others, but again, those are the 2 main reasons why we avoid induction. We avoid induction because we don't want her to be a chola sheyesh ba sakana prematurely. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides that she's going to be a chola, so then she'll be a chola. A woman's not allowed to put herself in that situation. And a woman, we have to recognize that the child has a specific mazel, that the baby is going to be born, and Hashem is going to decide which day that baby is going to be born, and we can't intervene. We can't interfere. Neither of those issues are relevant when we're dealing with a C-section, because the baby is not going to come out naturally. The baby is not going to come out vaginally. It's going to be a surgery, and the surgery needs to be scheduled. So once the surgery needs to be scheduled, I don't see any difference between Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Sunday, at the right time, when medically the doctor feels that this baby is ready to come out. And let's talk about that maybe soon, that 39 weeks. if the doctor feels that this is the optimal time that the baby should be born, so then we'll plan the C-section around that time. I don't see that either issue would be relevant here when the birth will not be natural either way. It won't be vaginal.
So again, when they did studies, and I sent you one study that showed that delivery after 39 weeks resulted in lower risks compared to going way past there and allowing people to go into labor. And there was a very significant paper that came out that suggested that even a first baby, everybody should be induced after 39 weeks and not wait for them to go overdue, and that the outcomes were better.
Right.
One of the reasons that wasn't instituted is hospitals don't have the capacity to induce everybody when they hit 39 weeks. But the paper reported that there was a decrease in cesarean section specifically by inducing people just after 39 weeks.
This is not the first time I'm hearing of this study. I've actually heard this study from a number of doctors. I've heard it from doctors who are delivering patients. I've heard doctors who themselves are pregnant, OBGYNs and fertility specialists who themselves are pregnant, and they called me to discuss induction, and they came to the conversation well equipped with this study, paper in hand, looking, for the heter to induce at 39 weeks. I'll just share my thoughts, albeit raw thoughts. I haven't really developed them, but I'll share with you what first came to mind, and I'm still struggling with it. And that is, as we mentioned, that hashkafic opposition to induction, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one who decides when babies are born. Yes, it's true that at 42 weeks, 41 weeks, 42 weeks, babies are still there, and the doctor will say we have no choice but to induce. It's medically unhealthy and medically inappropriate to keep on with the pregnancy. But for the most part, when a woman goes into labor naturally, so she goes into labor whenever her body goes into labor when HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends her into labor, so to speak. That's the way of the world. That's the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. And for us to assume that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has his teva, the way that he created teva, and the way he put it in motion. And of course, we don't believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is set teva on its way and then took a back step. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is involved in the bria every second of the day. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu would not be included in the bria, then the world would cease to exist. We say that in davening every day. HaMachadesh betuva b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh bereishis. Then we bring a pasuk, ka'amor. You know what the next words are? Ka'amor, la'oseh orim gedolim kili olam chazda. We say it every morning. What's the raya? What's the proof? The word oseh is in present. It's not asa. It's not asa orim gedolim. It's not that he did it and he put it into motion, but la'oseh, in the present. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is always actively involved in the bria to this very second, and this second, and this second, etc. A paper that would suggest that HaKadosh Baruch, it's like saying that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has his opinion, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to put this woman into labor when he feels it. But my studies show, my research shows that at 39 weeks, before HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts this woman into labor. So that's where my hashkafic difficulty lies with this paper that assumes that we can argue on the teva, on the bria, on HaKadosh Baruch Hu's system. So that's where I struggle with this paper and this research that shows that 39 is optimal, and waiting till one goes into labor naturally is less ideal.
Just to be specific, because I have it right in front of me, it compared 39 weeks induction versus basically a 41-week induction, which is we generally accept after 41 weeks is the time. Specifically, elective induction of labor at 39 weeks resulted in a lower cesarean section rate, lower rates of maternal morbidity, fewer stillbirths than neonatal deaths, and lower rates of neonatal morbidity.
Yeah.
It was a big hashkafa change. I don't know if we could say, but this came out in in, I believe, March of 2009, and gets discussed, very, very, very often, as a change in model. Do we say this is that we change with the times? Do we change with the times? Do I have my learning that's given to me? What I understand today is given to me from above, and therefore this is included in my learning. And thus, anybody after 39 weeks where I believe that I am improving their outcome, that should be available to me? Or do we say, no, we hold off from that?
It's a critical question. I would argue, though, even according to the school of thought that understands that our learning develops, and we're not a stale old religion, but our halacha not changes, but it has to make sense with modern medicine. Nevertheless, here I find it particularly interesting because we're not just taking an assumption that taking a halachic assumption or a halacha given and having to shift it because of the research, or the modern medicine. Here we're going against the bria. Meaning the fact that a woman will go into labor naturally is part of Hashem's bria, and no one can deny that. You can't reject that. That's part of, assuming you understand that Hashem is in charge and is governing nature. So that's part of that. That is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's. That is his will. For us to now come and say that, but this is ideal, this is optimal, this is, so I just find it to be difficult. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm not saying anything. I'm just telling you that I find it to be difficult. I do want to just I just want to address something that if I was unclear before that we should wait till 42 weeks. I wasn't suggesting. Someone wrote in the chat about the danger of 42 weeks. I absolutely agree that there is danger and risk holding off and allowing the woman to go too far. So I wasn't suggesting that you can only induce at 42. I was just saying it as an example. It was classically accepted that patients in their 40, the doctors would allow them to go up until 42 weeks before they would insist on inducing.
Okay, so that brings us to the next case, which is a physician who wants to induce their patient between 41 and 42 weeks. In the past, going back decades now, 42 weeks was the standard. And then 30 years ago, they really started looking at more statistics and said, really the morbidity and mortality really starts to increase at 41 weeks. So our point of view is we want all the babies between 41 and 42 weeks. And often the patient is saying, when is the last time that you will let me go? And I said 41 to 42 weeks. And they asked me, no, what is the last time you will let me go? And I say between 41 and 42 weeks. So they say, are you saying 42 weeks? And because I have Rabbanim that have told me you must wait for the last possible time.
Right.
And I got in a habit of saying to the patients, let me give you an example. The next 10 times you go take a flight, wait to the last possible time to go to the airport and see what happens. And then they say, I get what you're saying now. So when a patient shows up at the hospital at the last possible time at 42 weeks, the nurses and the residents will say to me, how did you let her get that far? Okay, so I am often in discussion with Rabbanim about the 42 weeks versus earlier between 41 and 42 weeks.
Right. I think that's an example of where halacha would quote unquote change, or where, that's a living Torah, whatever words you want to use, whatever phrase you want to use to describe that reality or that, that model. But if it was believed, and let's say in the times of the Chazon Ish, that it was believed that a woman can carry until 42 weeks and there won't be any medical issues with the pregnancy, with the mother, with the baby, so then that would dictate that the halacha would be that you can't induce before 42 weeks, because before 42 weeks, there's no medical indication to do so. If modern medicine is able to identify an issue between, at 42 weeks and really tell us that no, that 41 weeks, 39 weeks, it would be the best time to induce. So then then that would be an example of where we would say, I think that where we would say, Chazon Ish's medicine, the research that was available, that he had access to, the information that this Rav had access to is not the same medical information that we have access to. I do still think it's different than what I said before, that this whole discussion assumes that the woman has passed the point of, let's assume that 40 weeks, let's assume that a woman still goes into labor around 40 weeks. So that is the standard, finish line that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu placed that finish line in the ground. He was the one that put the posts in. Now, what happens when there's a woman who goes beyond that point? So then we have to discuss, okay, the woman has gone beyond that point. Now what? So based on the medical research that we have available to us today, we have to make the decision. That's the most medically appropriate time to induce. The Chazon Ish said 42 weeks. That's not a kasha, I don't think. I don't think that's difficult, because the Chazon Ish was working with his science and we're working with our science.
Again, just reiterating, I've still had numerous discussions with Rabbanim that are like on that 42-week wall. So I spar with them a little bit.
Yeah. I think that it is important, because I personally have seen cases of women that were not high risk and became very high risk, pregnancies that were very healthy until the end, but because they didn't give birth at the 40-week mark, at the 41, and they pushed the 42. I know of a few cases that had very tragic endings. So, now, is it mamish because of that? Maybe it was going to happen,
So I recently had a discussion with one of my patients who was very adamant, and I scheduled her basically daily after 41 weeks and 3 days. And she said 42, 42, 42. I said, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen, because we live it. This is our living. Is you're going to go through labor. It's a first baby, and we're going to give you contractions. And then after 10 hours, this baby's not going to be able to take it anymore, because the placental reserve is way down at this point already. And all of a sudden, the baby's not going to tolerate labor. And that's exactly what happened. And she ended up with a C-section because the baby couldn't take it. And I sat with my resident. She goes, I don't know if it would have been different, but if she had come 3 or 4 days beforehand, the baby probably could have made it to the finish line. And that's really what we're talking about. But what do I do now? Again, going back with that woman who's waving this report in my face and saying at 39 weeks, the outcomes are better than waiting for 41 weeks. I would like to be induced. How hard do I battle her about not being induced?
You're talking, which hat are you wearing? You're wearing your Dr. Herman hat or your Rabbi Herman hat?
No, but it's all part of me. I'm going to go to work tomorrow, and a patient will walk in and said, I read that report that you're talking about, that you talked about last night. And it says it's safer for my baby if I'm induced at 39 weeks than compared to waiting till 41. So I would like that.
Patient autonomy. I would imagine that are you obligated to listen to your patient? No,
I'll talk to her. And the question is how hard do I push back? How hard do I say, really, that's, we still believe labor is better, type of thing. It's one paper, type of thing. We don't do any special testing now at 39 weeks because of that paper. If you're going past 39 to see if something's happening, that hasn't changed in medicine, but we're all cognizant of the availability of that paper.
Right. That's a good question in terms of medical protocol. I think if you're talking to a from patient, again, I expressed my hashkafic concern and discomfort with that approach.
The difference is Teva is 40 weeks or around 40 weeks.
Yeah.
So before that, we're really messing a lot.
Assuming we're talking about a perfectly healthy pregnancy, a beautiful baby.
Yep. Okay. The next question, or the next case is the 40-year-old patient that comes in. And actually, it was really nice. I just delivered a 44-year-old not last night, but the night before. It was really, really beautiful. But there are certain risks that come with 40-year-olds. And the discussion and the main discussion, and I'm going to give you some numbers now. I actually sent you these numbers. The rates of stillbirth for women under 35, 35 to 40, and 40 years old. So we'll take under 35. On a first baby, the rate of stillbirth is 4 in 1,000, with between 37 and 41 weeks. With a 40-year-old, it's 9 out of 1,000. From 4, it becomes 9 out of 1,000. So there's a very big difference between what happens to women who are older. During a second, third, and fourth pregnancy, that was the first pregnancy we're talking about, it's about 1 in 1,000. But
under 35.
Under 35, but above 40, it's 3 in 1,000. So now, all patients, the first day that they come in, they're over 40 years old. We talk to them about being induced around their due date. Instead of going 41 plus, we do it at 40 plus. Or 39 and 39 after 39 and before 40 and 3. We would like the baby in that zone. In light of our conversation a couple of minutes ago, should I think differently about 39 to 40? Or do I just continue doing my 39 to 40? Let's look at the calendar. Let's look at, Shabbos, Yontif, convenience, this thing and that thing, but I want this baby born in that zone.
Yeah, I think, again, to go back to the original, the very first thing that I think both you and I agree on is that actually, I'll stick with me. You're entitled to your own opinion, but that a woman should not be induced unless it's necessary. So we threw out that necessary has to be defined. This is a great example of where we see that the necessity shifts with the patient, because we're not dealing with a 20-year-old, we're not dealing with a 22-year-old, we're dealing with a 35-year-old plus a 40 and 44-year-old. Since the medical research is clear that there is a heightened risk with advanced maternal age, so that risk is significant. And therefore, halacha would say, when someone asked, is this a halachic or hashkafic question? I think the answer is yes. It's both a halachic and a hashkafic question. The perspective on this patient would be very different than our perspective on the 20-year-old. This woman with advanced maternal age has to be treated like a high-risk patient, recognizing that there is a necessity because we aren't dealing with the most ideal of scenarios. And therefore, once the doctor feels more comfortable medically that this patient be induced at a certain window of time, I think halacha would recognize that and sanction that 100% and endorse it 100%. The question when in the week, when during the week, I don't think that there's a difference. I think that whatever would be best for the doctor would be best for the patient. If we can avoid Shabbos in these situations, avoid Shabbos if it doesn't make a difference. Parenthetically, many people ask, are we allowed, my doctor wants to induce, and the doctor feels it's necessary to induce, but the problem is it's Friday. Are we allowed to induce? If the doctor feels it's important to induce for a medical reason, it doesn't make a difference if it's Friday or Shabbos or Sunday or Monday. Once the doctor says this baby needs to come out, or chas v'shalom, we're risking the life of the baby, or a situation with the mother, so then Shabbos should not be a factor, just like a woman goes into labor on Shabbos.
That obviously falls under the different reasons to be induced. When there's no fluid around the baby, I see them on Friday and I say, listen, there's no fluid around the baby. I can't let you go. You have to go, and we need to start this process now before there's trouble. If the patient is a diabetic, and we have a lot more leeway of when we pick, and we don't need to pick Friday afternoon to have them come to.
Correct.
We mentioned a lot of different medical situations. We should talk about the maternal considerations, diabetes, renal disease. There's something wrong with the mother that we all agree upon. Something that's happening with this pregnancy itself, not ingrained in the mother, like high blood pressure, chorioamnionitis, ruptured membranes, preeclampsia, all of those things that happen now. And then, of course, there's a baby that's not growing well. There's no fluid around the baby. So let me talk to you about a case that I had. Too much fluid around the baby, right? 4 liters of fluid around the baby. We saw that already at 33 weeks. It had basically a swallowing issue. And we're monitoring, and everything is fine. But now we've approached 37 weeks and we have to decide when she should be induced, right? We really feel like medically we've gotten her to where she needs to be. But we still have a choice of what day to induce her. Again, we've hit our medical goal. Once we've hit our medical goal, in my mind, there's no issue of picking what time. And I think according to those criteria, there isn't either, but do we still take into account, mazel and maybe we should try to wait another week for her to go into labor on her own, or do we pick the day that the patient wants because the patient just says she wants that day?
Is there a risk in continuing the pregnancy?
Well, the truth is for 4 weeks, nothing has changed and the baby's doing just fine. So, I mean, the best place for a baby is certainly in the nursery. But, it's Friday afternoon and I said, I don't see any big reason we can't wait for Sunday. So we wait for Sunday. But on Sunday, the question I'm asking you is, you're going to ask me, is there anything that's forcing my hand today? Or could we wait for Wednesday? And I say, yeah, we could wait for Wednesday. So we monitor and now we're at Wednesday. And then you come to me and say, well, why can't we wait for Friday? And we keep, pushing the envelope. But meanwhile, the main discussion of all the doctors, the perinatologist is okay, we hit our target 37 weeks, go ahead and deliver her.
Well, again, I think that we have to always remember what the risks are and what the benefits of being inside is. We know that the benefits are. The benefits are that we don't have to worry about bringing on that status of a cholish sakana. We're not interfering with Teva, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world. So that's the benefit of the hands-off approach. The benefit of the induction approach is that we are actually saving this baby. We're bringing this baby from a vulnerable and from a risky environment into a safe one. But if the doctors have not identified the current environment and the current state of the baby as a danger, as a risk, so why get involved? I would think that, on the contrary, wonderful, you hit your mark and the baby's continuing and progressing well, and so why would we disturb that? That would be my approach.
Because we don't know what's going to happen next, and we don't.
Oh, so again, but that means that, but then that's something else. Meaning, if there's a risk, if the doctors are not able to unequivocally say that we have no reason to assume that something's going to happen. If they can say that we have no reason to assume that anything's going to happen, so let's continue the pregnancy. But if the doctors say we could give it a shot, but I can't guarantee everything is going to be fine. For A, B, and C, I can't guarantee that keeping this baby inside until 38 weeks is the safest idea. So I think that changes the equation drastically.
Well, certainly compared to a baby that doesn't have polyhydramnios, if you want to compare them, the group that does is going to have a poorer outcome than the ones that are regular.
Okay, understood. Yeah.
So we talked about the next line was induction by request of the patient after 39 weeks. So we already talked about it. I'm just going to come to just a few left. And this is slightly a different category and different reason to be induced. A patient comes to me and says, in my last pregnancy, I had immediate postpartum hemorrhage right after I gave birth. I bled very heavily. I got 2 units of blood, and I'm really worried that that's going to happen again. And I speak to the patient about, remember, I have partners, and the patient says, I came here for you. I want you to be there. And I said, the truth is I want to be there because I would like to avoid, and I feel in my hands, this is what I do, and we're going to hopefully avoid that postpartum hemorrhage. So why don't you come in on Tuesday? You'll be 39 weeks and 5 days at that point. And I'll put you in labor and I'll sit with you and I'll make sure that I'm sitting there for right after birth when your risk is so high. And I understand. And so my argument is there is nothing wrong with this patient. There is nothing wrong with this pregnancy. This is based on a previous history. Other doctors could take care of that and they do it very well. And we practice taking care of these situations. But the patient is telling me that they are very worried, they are very scared, and they would like me there. And I have specifically done what I've just told you.
I think, in my opinion, I think it's pashut. We know Chazal tell us that a patient, the sick person, knows themselves better than anyone. And if the patient is nervous about it, and we find in different areas of halacha, especially in Yom Kippur, where a patient feels that this is what I need, even though the doctors are looking around and saying this is not really what you need medically, but this is what the patient feels that they need. There are certain major heterim that will allow on Yom Kippur. Basar b'chalav. I mean, the Shulchan Aruch is filled with these examples where a patient will look the doctor in the face and say, I know what your medical guidance would be, but I'm the patient, this is what I feel. And very often halacha sides with the patient because they know themselves better than anyone. And therefore, if a patient is anxious about it, the patient would feel that that they have a certain fear of going to labor with another doctor, or a fear of what's going to happen post labor. I certainly feel that is enough to justify induction. That would not be called unnecessary, but rather that's necessary for this patient. Similarly, this may be what you're going to ask me. I got the Shiloh over the weekend, with the holidays here and the hospital packs out. And, on the one hand, I don't want to induce, but on the other hand, I know that my doctor's going here, my doctor's going there. Staffing is going to be, staffing is going to be at a significant decrease. I want to go into labor because I want the full staff. I want the full nursing team. I want my doctor. I don't want to have to go into the weekend or to the holiday weekend with whoever's going to be in the hospital. I'm nervous about that. If a patient is genuinely nervous about it, I think that's also justified. And we would allow the patient to induce, assuming the doctor agrees with it and feels that that's in the window of medically responsible and appropriate. I think that we shouldn't poo-poo and disregard a patient's desire to be with their doctor, to be in the environment that they want to deliver. I think that that emotional ingredient is quite important.
Which is going to be the last one. But the next case is a patient who has a poor obstetrical history. So I've had numerous patients who've come to me after losing a baby close to the delivery date. And now they've come back to me and I've told them, I don't care, and I do care how many babies you have in the future, but every baby that you have in the future, I am going to bring you in when it's appropriate. I will sit with you through the whole labor and delivery, and I will try to manage to make sure that everything goes, properly. And I have patients who've had 3, 4, and 5 babies after losing their first. And I still insist. I tell them, I know we've had 5 babies in a row that are okay, but when it comes to the end of the pregnancy, I would like to bring you in and sit with you, to have this baby, to make sure everything goes as best as possible. So in this case, it's not the patient who's asking me, it's me telling them that this is what I would like to do based on their previous history. So it's a slightly different, turn.
The patient doesn't want to induce?
They would like wait for labor if I would let them wait for labor.
So why not let them wait? What's the big deal? Why not let them go into labor?
I feel that no woman deserves one advanced loss. And if I do anything to ensure that their pregnancies, their deliveries go well, that they don't get put into that, how could a woman take that twice? I don't know how a woman could take that once, how anybody could take that one, the loss of a child.
Is there medical backing to what you're saying, or it's emotional?
More emotional than anything else. I mean, it's my emotions.
Yeah, and I understand. If there was medical research that supported, or there was a correlation between one loss and multiple losses, and therefore the it would be medically indicated to induce to prevent that loss, so then I think that's totally different.
Okay, but that's not what we're talking
If the woman doesn't want to be induced, and the loss is, of course, she never forgot about it, but it's 5 babies ago, and she's had 2, 3, 4 children afterwards, and she doesn't want to be induced.
Okay, but from an emotional point of view, that's
If
really
she was the one that started the conversation, if she said, Dr. Herman, I can't go into labor myself. I need to know that when 39 weeks hits, I need to be where, on that bed with you, holding my hand, whatever it is. So that's a totally different story that we don't, I would agree with her. Which the trauma that she went through, I think would be a further justification of calling that necessary induction.
Yeah, but I have a little issue letting them go to 41 weeks and 41 weeks and 3 days with this previous history where there's a slight increased risk.
No, I think it's critical to consider their history. And once there is any indication that this is not your standard typical woman, but she has a history, I think it's a different ballpark, different metrics.
So what's coming at you next, which is the woman who delivers in front of the hospital last pregnancy.
Yep.
And now everything is right with this pregnancy. She's forewarned that it could happen.
That's right.
It's
It's also a very emotional experience. A woman gives birth on the sidewalk. Their child's birth certificate says that place of birth is outside LIJ. That's what it says on the actual thing. That's a very emotional experience. And should a woman go through that and be scarred by that experience, and she wants to do anything in her power to see to it that doesn't happen, I have allowed that in the past, and will continue to permit that.
I have very frequently people coming to me and says, listen, I only come to you as a doctor, but I live in Lakewood and it's really far away. And I'm scared I'm going to deliver along the way. Never delivered along the way, but now had 2 babies, lived in the 5 towns, live in Far Rockaway, half an hour from the hospital, but now they live an hour and a half from the hospital. Muncie, I have patients coming to me from Muncie. They're worried that they're going to deliver along the road when they finally get into labor. So ACOG, American College of OBGYN, recognizes that as an indication to be induced. And I'm wondering what your view is on this situation.
I think I would agree with ACOG on this one.
Mm-hmm. But again, in light of our conversation, again, maybe we should wait till 40 weeks in a day, or we want to preempt that so they don't get into that situation and use our normal 39 weeks.
I'm assuming that the anxiety, the stress, the fear of going into labor, and then delivering en route to Winthrop is enough of an anxiety attack that we would say that we don't want her to go through that. That's not something that we want a pregnant woman to go through. And
they're asking me for that. Is there something that we're allowed to do, and so on?
Right. So I would, my personal opinion, I think once you've reached that 39 week mark, 39 and however many days, that you have research, again, I'm uncomfortable with it, but you have a research paper and you have many doctors of the opinion that this is an ideal time to deliver, to induce, and we're not doing anything medically inappropriate. On the contrary, perhaps it's even appropriate. And we are combating a legitimate concern and anxiety of giving birth en route to the hospital. I think that's grounds to permit an induction.
The next two and the last two are again about psychosocial indications. Is the patient who had difficulty getting pregnant. She went through in vitro, put a lot into getting pregnant, and is now reaching the goal of having a baby after many years of trying. And she says, could I be induced? I went through so much. Baby's fine, mother's fine. Again, we get to this the nervous patient.
I think it's important to point out that the medical protocol for an IVF patient is not automatically to induce, right? So they can deliver naturally. They're once they're out on their own, they go to their OBGYN and they are regular patients. So their pregnancy is a regular pregnancy, their labor is a regular, assuming unless there's something in there's certain red flags, but assuming there's not, this patient, although she had a history of infertility, but that behind us, she is a regular patient, and she should deliver regularly like everyone else. If a specific patient comes with trauma because of her infertility journey, and she comes with anxiety and fear, so then I think, yeah, she's back into that category. We have to broaden the definition of necessary. But I don't think that we should start requiring all IVF patients to now have induction because of what her history looks like. She should be treated like a normal patient.
Again, the normal regular patient, I wouldn't make an offer to the patient who struggled to get pregnant. I might speak to them. Listen, I'm giving you an offer. You could take it or leave it. I know that you went through so much. If you would like to, I would be happy to put you into labor. So not that I do that, but that's the idea. So we should back off a little bit from that and just let
her bask in the glory of being pregnant. She wanted to be pregnant so long. Give her a few more days. And finally, the mood disorder, like the patients who are depressives, who have are medication because of, for long-term medications under the care of psychiatrists. Often we bring them in to induce them, to guide them, to watch them, to make sure. I just delivered somebody who's really a depressive. Social work is involved. A lot of support is necessary, and not that she's asking to be induced, but again, it becomes my feeling that, listen, I don't want her delivering on a Saturday night at 3:00 in the morning, and then they have no resources going forward. And I'm not talking about someone who has postpartum blues, who's, I'm not as happy as I usually am. I'm talking about the real hardcore, Absolutely. Absolutely. Just like we would in any other case, where that this patient, that the baby or the patient is going to need extra medical care. And even if you feel that there will be staff whenever the woman goes into labor, but you feel that a specific team is better equipped to deal with this emergency situation, whether it's an issue with the baby or with the mother, I think that that's certainly another justification and requirement. I think on the contrary, induce them and see to it that team is there to deliver the baby, to care for the baby and to the mother as best as necessary, as best as possible. Absolutely.
It's interesting, and just as a final comment, because we've completed the outline, that I laid out, is so often I bring in a patient, at let's say 11:00 at night, with the idea, if we time this well, she's going to give birth between 8 in the morning and noon the next day. And at 5 p.m., 5 hours after we thought she was going to give birth 10 hours ago, she's still pregnant. And I say, no matter what we do, we still don't determine when these babies are delivered. Even with our induction and our medication and all our calculating, still we talk about, the mazel comes when the mazel is supposed to come, and so on, after all of our figuring out what to do.
Right. That's a good point. So even with medical intervention, there's still mazel. I mean, we don't rule out HaKadosh Baruch Hu's involvement in anything, no matter how well equipped we are medically. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is always behind it, always behind the scenes. Beautiful.
I'm just looking over here to some of the comments. What happens when the doctor's Rav's guidance and the patient's Rav's guidance is different? Not exactly sure what that means, but when that happens, we figure it out. We get together and we figure out what to do. We don't really get everybody usually comes to a consensus at that point.
Yeah.
Good. Any final comments?
It's great.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And again, the next in the next month, we're going to be talking about NIDA in labor. I wouldn't say a controversial topic, but many Rabbanim have different opinions. It's very confusing. We know some points where they're definitely a NIDA, but there's, I think, a lot to be talked about, and hopefully we could resolve some of the issues.
Okay, looking forward. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. All the best. Thank you, Dr. Herman. Good luck with his labor.
Yep, I hope it's soon. I'm sorry. Okay, we'll get it done. Good. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.